right, so this is just a sort of case study in shifting opinions and perspectives. Russell found these two videos. So do you want to set up what we're about to see?
Yes, and this will allow us, I'm glad you put this last, because these are grim times and we want to give people some hope. I have never seen so many people become informed on this issue in a meaningful way, and it happened very quickly. So if there's any good to come out of this horror, it's that Israel, as it has existed, I believe, is over. It cannot continue because too many people are waking up to what it really is, who a month ago didn't know and didn't ask. So we found a couple of very interesting videos dealing with that.
Okay, so this first is an Arab man saying, "Thank you, Israel, for showing the world your true character."
تحياتي طارق. I really want to thank you, Israel, for the last couple of weeks. I really want to thank you for finally liberating the American public from your grip. I really want to thank you for finally allowing people to criticize you freely without being scared. People were terrified of you, but right now they're not. The whole world is speaking out against your atrocities, against your lobby, against the control of the media. I want to thank you for uniting the whole world in support of the Palestinian people. I want to thank you for making us the #1 case in the world. I want to thank you for exposing the traitors and the cowards and the people that pretend to be for humanity, but they're nothing but conspiring and complicit for atrocities around the world. I want to thank you for finally showing the world who you really are. And I want to thank you for liberating the Palestinian people, because this is the end. I want to thank you for so many things, uniting us. What a weekend we had. We all came together and we celebrated the freedom from your grip. Eventually, everyone is going to be free from your monstrous grip.
Yeah, I mean, great stuff there. And I would add one more thing to his monologue, which is it really in these times exposes people to the power and virulence of real, actual racism. You see the power of actual racism because, you know, we've devoted a lot of time to this show. We've spent a lot of time on this show, I should say, calling out people for either seeing racism where it doesn't exist or blaming more systemic problems on what they can sort of put in a racial context, right? This sort of pseudo woke for you. If you don't want us to sort of bastardize the term woke, the pseudo woke industrial complex, right? The Robin DiAngelos, right? Who get paid to go in and lecture working class people about their racial blind spots and things like that, right? You have these capitalists basically going in and speaking the language of racial tolerance and fear-mongering about your racist coworker, who's on the clock with you, who throws microaggressions your way, 4 or 5 times a shift, and this is why your workplace is dysfunctional, right? That
white supremacy,
right? That is not real power racism. This is
right.
This is. Right. When you cannot have a case as simple as from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which means nothing more than Palestinian people will enjoy free and equal rights from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. On this land, our people will be free to live their lives as they choose. That is all that phrase means. Right. That is all that phrase means. But it is abject racism that allows people like Dana Bash to say, no, that's not what it means, because that's not what Jews say it means, meaning that's not what we say it means. It doesn't matter what you say it means or what non-Zionist Jews say it means. It only matters what we say, because we're the only people who count. We're the only people who matter. And you see that ideology, weaponized to such extreme and obscene degrees as to these same anchors seem to have every excuse in the book ready to go when Israel attacks. Refugee camps, ambulance envoys, schools, mosques, hospitals, you name it. They never run out of reasons why we have to support them anyway, to the point where we had that Israel march yesterday in the wake of all this. As a hospital was being sieged, you had thousands of people on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. with the leaders of both major parties who are at each other's throats on every other issue come out and hold hands to unite behind the Israel terror campaign in Gaza. That's racism. That is absolute racism, whether white boy Mike Johnson does it or Hakeem Jeffries does it. It's the same racism. Right. And this conflict has brought that to light in a way that we haven't seen before. We haven't seen before. I shouldn't say that. That's wrong. We have seen it before, but we haven't been seeing much of it recently because so much of racial discourse has been hijacked by hucksters. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, that's the role people like Hakeem Jeffries and Kamala Harris play within the system to make it look like it's fair and progressive, right? Where we're rising ever upward, the universe is bending towards justice, right? Because we have people with the same old ideas, policies, attitudes as morally compromised, but it's a diverse group of people, right? It's not all white anymore, so we've really made progress. And they were lining up Tlaib and Omar for that as well. They were going to be their pet, Muslims, and they were going to use them to cover up their crimes. But this was a bridge too far for them. They couldn't do it. They couldn't go along with this. They could sell out their constituents on force the vote. They could sell them out on the infrastructure bill being paired to what was the name of the other part of that bill? I forget now.
The infrastructure bill, well, it was Build Back Better.
Build Back Better. Was that the other part? No, there was the other part that they said they wouldn't vote for the one without the other. It doesn't
I forget
matter.
What the other part was called.
Everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah.
They could sell them out with that, but this was just too much. This was just too much. They couldn't do it. But that's really the function that they serve. On a personal note, I've said on several shows now, Hebrew school, my experience of Hebrew school was they teach you Hebrew and they teach you Zionism. And that was one of the reasons I didn't like it. I instinctively felt like they were trying to sell me a bridge, right? It was just too much constant pressure coming to believe a certain thing. And even as a child, I always reacted negatively to that kind of energy. But later on, when I learned more about Judaism, I actually felt very cheated by that experience. Because Judaism, if you're a very philosophical kind of a person who really likes to run thought experiments about the nature of the universe, that is a religion you'll probably have a lot of fun exploring. And that's really what those rabbis were trying to say today, that's what it is. But I can tell you from my experience in Hebrew school, what they're saying is true. These Zionists so infiltrated the religion that if you went to, the equivalent of Sunday school as a Jew in America, you probably don't even know that Zionism is not Judaism. You're only that is how deep their roots have gotten into the entire community. And it's something that maybe as part of this, we can tear up. And that is a good setup to the next video, because this girl, I know this girl, man. I mean, not for real, but I know this girl. This girl is a very typical kind of Jewish girl who I'm sure got bat mitzvahed, grew up in a probably Jewish neighborhood, probably has predominantly Jewish friends. And watching somebody like that wake up is amazing.
All right. Here's video number 2.
Ask yourself the question of, when did you start to ask yourself the question of, what about Palestine?
Too freaking late. I started asking myself that question too freaking late. I grew up culturally Jewish. My friends, my boyfriends, my life was surrounded by Jewish people. In fact, it was kind of cool to be Jewish when I grew up. I didn't even really know the concept of Zionism, because Zionism was just Judaism, right? The idea that Israel should be a safe haven for Jewish people. that just was what it was. The concept of birthright made total sense. I didn't even question it. The fact that the government would subsidize a trip to Israel so that you could see your homeland, that didn't strike me as weird at all. And the Jewish population is pretty small, so there's only a few degrees of separation between you and somebody who lives in Israel. And it just felt like part of the package of being Jewish. I didn't question the fact that after the Holocaust we would need a safe haven. And yes, 6 million people dying this close in terms of the history of the world is terrifying. And yes, Jewish people are not the most beloved people on the planet, right? Traditionally, we're not. So yeah, it made sense to me. But I didn't think about how many other people have been genocided and that they don't get their own theocratic ethno-state. I didn't know that in order to achieve that, in order to get Israel to be Israel, that Palestinians had to be forcibly removed from their homes. I didn't know that it was an illegal occupation. I didn't know that Israel controlled a huge percentage of Palestinians' water. I didn't know that it was a 75-year occupation. I didn't know that Palestinians had to move through checkpoints in order to get anywhere. I didn't know that 90% of their economy is from handouts, that like the world has been giving them resources because they don't have any of their own because of said occupation. I didn't know that there were thousands of Palestinian prisoners in Israel that don't get a trial, hundreds of whom are kids. I didn't know that Israel had one of the strongest militaries in the world and provides military supplies to a lot of the rest of the world. I didn't think about the fact that putting an ally in the middle of the Middle East filled with Jews as a gift from the US and from the British would be a super smart political tactic, because none of the rest of the world wanted us anywhere. My first thought after the October 7th attack was what a brutal, horrific thing to happen to the Jewish population and to the Israeli civilians, and I still believe that that is true. However, I didn't have context. And now that over 10,000 Palestinians have died. Now that I know that Israel dropped more bombs in 6 days than the US dropped in Afghanistan in an entire year of war. Now that I've listened and learned for the past 3 weeks, I wish I had asked, what about Palestine, sooner?
Boom. When you lost that girl, you lost. You lost. I know this girl. When you lost her, you lost everybody. You lost everybody except the bloodthirsty fucking psychos at that rally,
Right.
most of whom I promise you were probably over 40. Most of them are from that older generation of Jews where you just didn't even question this.
Please clap.